let me do the introduction. Welcome to the first ever Real Humans, Great Souls podcast that will go on hopefully Wednesdays at 8 p.m. from here on forward. And I am so thrilled to be live on YouTube. Now, I don't see that anybody found me, and I don't know why that is. We shall. Okay. Yeah, my familiarity is with Facebook Live and my Twitch channel and recording on Instagram and TikTok, etc. But this is my first time live on YouTube. Of course, in my channel, I've posted many videos and interviews, but I have not done this. So, what is Real Humans, Great Souls all about? Well, those of you who know me a little bit know that I like to think broadly about everything that is being a human on this little planet that I love so much. I really do love little planet Earth and my being on it. So I'm here because I want to be here, and I think there's so much beauty in being alive on planet Earth. And being real human means participating in what is going on at a particular time in history. And being a great soul maybe means that we can maintain our sense of being part of the all and being it all, if that makes sense. So, and therefore, we're starting in today's podcast talking about the biology on planet Earth, because of course we inhabit this biology as well, which is part of biology on planet Earth. And I think humans tend to forget that we are indeed part of biology or inhabiting this biology as we are inhabitants of planet Earth. I want to start, however, with giving a brief idea of why I feel I should be talking about health and planet, since I'm neither a dietitian nor a politician, neither a medical doctor nor a economist or analyst, nor a journalist. All these lists I'm not, or ists I'm not. And so I need to give a quick introduction for those of you who are finding me on YouTube who don't know my email lists and my social media, of why I feel entitled to talk about health and planet. And of course, I'm not giving medical advice. Let's put that right out there. The disclaimer should also be in text. Why I should be talking about health and planet is that my entire life has been consumed with understanding and being the best human that I can be. And I'm sure that is true for many of you too. So, what is that, the best human I can be? Is it just living the life of the tradition of our parents? Is it living our own truth and mission? Is it rebelling against that which is, or is it continuing that which is, that which we are born into? And I think it is a little bit of all of the above for me. And therefore, I probably am privileged or lucky to have been born into a family or two parents who were pacifists, who were Waldorf teachers. So they came into their professional life with a philosophy of peace or toward peace and embrace of humanity, an embrace of humanity. They had their short sights as well, but the basic for being an understanding human being rather than a categorized, judgmental human being was provided by my parents and by the Waldorf education, which of course includes a lot of creativity. Now, I maintain that creativity is what makes us humans, what distinguishes us from other creatures, that we can actually create things that are not like that in nature. We can use nature, hopefully not in a destructive manner, which of course we have done plenty of times throughout the last 7,000 years, and particularly in the last 200 years. We have used our creativity and inventiveness to be rather destructive. And I think that now is the time to turn that destructiveness around and work toward using our creativity and inventiveness to harmonizing our creations with that nature, with biology on planet Earth. That's also why my first topic is biology on planet Earth. But to the introduction of myself a little bit more, so I was born to Waldorf teachers, pacifists who had survived the Second World War as anti-Hitler and anti-fascism people in Europe. And so I have that notion deeply ingrained in me. So anti-fascism is probably a big theme. I'm laughing because I'm thinking, of course, even that has become a bad word, the short thereof. I'm not going to say it. And I then grew into various learning periods in my life, starting out, interestingly, with living and working at a Camp Hill in Scotland. I was very young. I was only 17 and learned to work with special needs children and adults in a very loving, very homey, very humanistic environment toward understanding that even in a non-functioning body or in a partially non-functioning brain, there is in each one human that human being that we ought to respect. So working at Camp Hill really imprinted in me that deep respect for all humans. May they be impaired, or what we consider impaired at the time, the expression was still handicapped in quotation marks. Today we use the word disabled, but that's just the physical part for the most part. And the physical part, of course, is also the brain. So learning that inside of a disabled or partially impaired physical body, there is still a human being to be respected and loved. So then I went through, I'm just going to make it very short. I went through various stages of studying Waldorf kindergarten teacher, studying Waldorf teacher, not completing it because then I was called to be in theater, and my on-stage career started there, and on film career started there, being on stage, singing and acting, and then into film and into a couple of one-woman shows. So all in the European context, that was rather broad. And so, yeah, I've been in about 10, 15 shows and movies. And then I moved to Zimbabwe with my first husband. Well, I really cut it very short. In between that time was also a year in Paris studying modern dance, a year studying music at conservatory. And so there was more broad education toward the creative world of being in performance arts in general. So then Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is incredibly important in my life for the understanding of the planet Earth and how it actually is run, by whom it is run, by exactly the people who run planet Earth and pretty much all of humanity, with agendas that are not necessarily always or ever favorable to the majority of the population, to the majority of humans. I'm just going to use the word humans for the most part. So in Zimbabwe, right after its independence and being very close to the new government there, I learned all of that. I learned about colonialism. I learned about who ran colonialism, where those decisions were being made. I learned about really that 95% of the world population was considered to be colonized by very few. And that we have just experienced is still true. Although it has taken all kinds of different forms, and I want to explore many of those details in this podcast without getting myself kicked off anywhere. So I want to be very careful and analyze humanity and why certain things happen from the inside out, from that which drives humans to do things, and what drives us humans to feel ourselves, to feel empowered, to feel alive, to feel respected, to feel ultimately loved, which of course we're only just really beginning to learn. Really, we're only just beginning to learn what it is to be loved and to love others. And not in a possessive way. That's the thing. We confused for millennia, we confused love with ownership. Or we replaced that which should be love with ownership. And that's not to say that there hasn't been love between a mother and their baby, and between two humans, and between peoples in a group, in a family, in a clan, etc. But you know what I mean. I mean, the overall notion was ownership precedes or over what's the word I'm looking for? supersedes is the word. Yeah, supersedes that sense of love. All right, so doesn't look like people have found us, but that's okay because we're going to record this anyway. And when I said today I'm talking about biology, and in one of the sub headlines, I said we're talking about procreation, sex and procreation. And of course, that is kind of the answer to what is life, right? Life is a constant recreation of life itself. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but let me first complete the lifespan of mine so far. I'm only just 70, so there's so much more to come. So Zimbabwe then is leading me to the United States. And in 1985, I land with my first husband in the United States and spend a year in New York and then a year in Los Angeles, using my movie connections to get to know some people over there. And then I come back to New York to accept the invitation or accept the acceptance into the film department at Columbia University. And I study writing, directing, and producing, yes, all three sectors of filmmaking, and make a couple of movies and win a couple of awards, and only to realize that what I really, really need to do now and want at that stage is to have a family, to have children. And I take a corporate job to have a safe and secured income. And it so happens that that was at an international law firm where I was able to translate 5 languages, and therefore had insight into enormous amounts of documents that gave me another level of understanding of economy, of the biggest corporations in the world, some of which we now hear every other day, and the biggest money makers, and who runs the economy of our world, and therefore our politics to a certain extent as well, to a great extent. Because I had those documents, I could now underpin my already pretty good understanding of how politics and economies in the world, how the world is run, that I just said, I learned in Zimbabwe. So I am at this international law firm, and I don't have to physically be there all the time because fax machines already existed, even though there was no internet yet. In 91 is when I started there. But, things could be faxed to me, and I could send back. I think in the beginning, I think I already had a computer. No, in 94 was the first laptop. Before that, it was literally faxing back and forth, or mailing packages of translations back and forth, typed on my electronic or electric typewriter. Well, it had a little band where the words ran across as I was typing. Most of you guys have no idea what I'm talking about, but yeah, those were the latest technologies in the 1980s and then early 90s. And then in 94, I indeed had the very first Macintosh laptop. It was thick like that and heavy, but you could travel with it. It was pretty neat. So that's how my film career kind of ended. And I had my children and I was traveling, and I was also teaching as a professor. I had already been teaching at Columbia while going to film school, but then I was teaching at various universities, at the School of Visual Arts, and then for a stint at Yale, and then at City College, etc. So for a bunch of years, I did both the teaching at universities and the translations for the law firm and raising my children while also traveling. So one thing was never quite enough for my doing, and it is part of my existence on the planet that I make connections and put out mine and other people's thoughts, and I then got into interviewing people. A while later, there's a lot in between, of course. I started Johanna's Raw Foods, the food production company. Important little tidbit is that at the age of 50, I had a little too much work and a little too much personal stress, and I'll talk about that in a particular podcast, I'm pretty sure. Maybe together with somebody else. I was in a very stressful relationship, and I had a stroke. And that started me on the raw food diet. And out of that grew Johanna's Raw Foods, the food company that then got into all the stores up and down all the health food stores, I should say, up and down the East Coast. But as in so many cases, I was so underfunded that a couple of years later, not a couple, I mean, quite a few years later, we had to close our factory because we could not get the investment we needed to meet the demand and operate. So our operation funds were gone. So then we go into my becoming a coach more and more. I've, being a teacher, being a professor, being a parent, homeschooling and helping teenagers, that's all there as well. Of course, starting with being an assistant and assistant teacher in Camp Hill as a 17-year-old for the kids that were in my immediate counseling care. I have always been a teacher. I've always been what other word is there? Teacher, mentor, coach, professor, all in that same vein. I love seeing others come into their own and growing into their own mission, their own happiness, their own health, their own body that works best for them. All right. Of course, there's a lot more post professor and law firm and factory coming into speaking a lot, and that was cut short, obviously, in 2020. And then we have coaching and building the institution that I think will be my life's work, and that's the rawsomelifeglobal.com online university that should also become a live manifested building and community on a piece of land. I think in the US, if it really, really can't happen, maybe it needs to be in a different country. We'll see. But yeah. So in the meantime, let's talk about biology. All right. Does anybody want to comment? Please feel free. This is my first time being on YouTube Live, so you all have to help me out. I'm not seeing any comments. You can comment live, I believe. So make me see that you're there, and make me answer a question that you have or clarify something as I am moving along with the program. So why do I want to talk about biology and biology on planet Earth and biology of being a human? Because I think we have become so focused on the minutia of biology and life and molecules and atoms and this element and this vitamin and that mineral and this and that and the other. And we have lost track, or maybe never had that real track, to realize some of the basics that are life on planet Earth. For example, we don't talk about the fact that life is always a cycle and always reinventing itself and always progressing and always rejuvenating. Even as we sit in this body, our cell tissue and the trillions of bacteria and parasites and fungi and other entities, what we call viruses, which I think is actually more of a cleaning agent of our cell tissue. But, never mind, viruses, whatever you call them. All of that life constantly rejuvenates itself. And that's simplifying that fact. I like to say life is a symphony of tiny entities that constantly renew themselves and that allow us to form bodies of different kinds. Whether we are an animal or an insect or a plant or a bacterium, right? Or an algae or something tiny. It's always that same life cycle, and that life cycle feeds on other entities that, unless we go down to the tiniest of tiniest parts, we have life feeding on other live entities. Cut to the chase, every time we inhale a huge amount of bacteria, same entities, bacteria, fungi, viruses, parasites, trillions of critters that are in air that we can breathe. If we sterilize that air, we cannot live. And I really think that should give us pause. So what then is health if all those elements have to be present to make up life? And to me, that has always been balance. When any of those entities go out of whack, we get what we then call sickness. When any of those entities and our human cells, of course, as well, get deprived of the proper live nutrients, we get crippled cells. We get cells that don't know where they belong, and we then call that diseases of all kinds of various forms, depending on where those incapacitated cells happen to land. So what is biology? Another couple of basic laws on planet Earth. So there's this law of constant rejuvenation, constant cycles of life, right? And everything that grows has to also decay. And in its decay process, it has to become kind of nourishment for other tiny entities that then are helping the next generation to come up. Of course, in the plant cycle, we see that much clearer. When the leaves fall to the ground, they become the fertile soil, the energizer for new seeds that will grow and need that environment of the fallen, decaying leaves to have the nutrients, the minerals that the next plants will need. So everything in these cycles functions when nature is among other natural materials. Now, some people will say, well, everything is natural because everything is made out of something natural, like this desk here is plastic, right? Or rather, it is actually a plastic paint around a board made out of, we call it particle board, right? Out of wood shavings and stuff, and lots of glue. Now, what is wrong with that? Well, what is wrong with it is that the plastic element of it is made under circumstances, plastics and melted crude oil products are made in environments or under circumstances that do not naturally occur on planet Earth. For example, very high heat, very high pressure, very shocking combustions or combinations of molecules that normally do not bond are forced to bond, and therefore then are created into a compound, into a material that nature itself can no longer break apart so that it becomes fertilizer again. And of course, you could say, well, that's true for rocks as well. But rocks have never inhibited life or have been what we then call toxic to life, right? So things that are made, and again, I had the privilege of translating documents to understand how certain materials are made under what incredible circumstances, and like I said, pressures and temperatures and forced combinations that do not happen in nature. Because I have translated those documents, I know a little bit of how nature is overridden, is broken down, is no longer functioning in its normal function. And therefore, we now have compounds. And, every other thing in our household, you can see the cover of my phone, you can see the mouse, you can see the pen. It's all plastics that will not compost, meaning decompose in the natural environment, or at least not until a lot of time passes or until new forms of bacteria are created that then break down plastics. But then we have to be worried that there's too much of that bacteria and we don't know what to do with it once it has eaten up the plastics. You know, maybe, what do we do when all the plastics are eaten up with that bacteria? Because what's it going to destroy next? So, out of human creativity, of course, do come these products that have been created by humans. And wouldn't it be wise now to see to it that we can create very similar products that perform similar purposes and duties by making them out of materials that do decompose? And it can be after a long time. You know, stone and wooden houses, for example, do stand for hundreds of years, thousands of years sometimes, and still they do not impair nature. So biology, respected, teaches us that life on planet Earth is best maintained if we do respect it. With that, with looking at biology also comes another simple fact. And maybe you've heard me talk about it before, and that is that life has a limited temperature on planet Earth. All of the life we know on planet Earth lives within that limited temperature. There's very, very little, if any, life beyond those temperatures or that temperature range. And that is, some life can survive freezing to a certain level, but it cannot survive heating. Now, whether you take a plant, an insect, an animal, or a human, we cannot survive when the temperature, the inner temperature of that live entity surpasses 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it dies. Life ends at that temperature. Actually, for humans, of course, you know, a fever of 120 is completely unfathomable. Our life ends already at 106. And it's very precise that survivability is very limited. The inner temperature, the fever temperature, right? We can sit in 150 degrees for a limited amount of time, and it might even be good for us. You know, we start sweating, etc. But the inner temperature is maintained at our livable temperature under 100 degrees. So life has a limited temperature, and it's something that nobody talks about, and it has been bothering me for 20 years, ever since I went raw, you know, and realized some of those facts. And that doesn't mean that we can't operate with other temperatures. We can use them. We can use a fireplace. We can use a welding tool, or we can melt iron and make steel with high temperatures, etc. But we cannot expect life to exist and or to be nourished with temperatures above those limits or below those limits. Mind you, dry ice, and I have worked with dry ice in my entertainment days because I had dry ice on my stage for the fog effect. You know how that works. Dry ice burns, kills life as well when it's that low a temperature. I'm doing too many here. Sorry about that. Some some other people do too. Um, there we go. I got to work at that. I really got to work at that. Life on planet Earth has a limited temperature. And there's another law of life and biology of biology. Of course, biology is the living forms on, or the analysis and understanding of the living forms on planet Earth, right? The living forms of what we call matter. We'll talk about that as well. What is matter, really? Should we still even be talking about matter? Because we now know that matter isn't just matter. And the other law that I want to talk about is the law that has the seed. When I love the story of the acorn falling from the tree and being picked up by a bird and swallowed whole and pooped out nicely fertilized onto the top of a hill and finding fertile ground and growing. So, but I tell the story differently. It's too long to do the whole thing. In that connection, I talk about the law of gravity, and the acorn follows the law of gravity when it falls off the tree, and again when it falls with the poop out of the bird onto the ground. And then when a little bit of humidity or rain falls upon it, yes, it still is taken by gravity, but something very different happens. Gravity alone no longer holds it. Inside of that seed, another force emerges that has a whole new entity of life, a whole new life form move toward the sky, away from gravity, in the opposite direction of gravity. And that is a force that we don't even talk about. We call it photosynthesis. But photosynthesis doesn't mean that every time photosynthesis happens, something grows toward the sky, right? That incredible force that has life growing counter to gravity is a very, very important part of biology, because it is. I always ask my audiences when I speak, what is that? And they say life, they say photosynthesis, and then there's always somebody comes up, life force. And then I'm all happy and I'm saying, yeah, would you all agree? And it's such a revelation that biology is actually only possible as long as that life force is there, is in the cell tissue, is in the entities, the forms of biology, whatever they may be. As soon as that life force leaves, and that's another mysterious moment. We have all these religious stories and all these mythological stories of when the soul leaves the body, then the body decays and becomes matter again, and the soul goes somewhere else. What is that life force? Where is it going? when the plant dies, when the animal dies, when the human dies. Now, some of us have probably had those experiences of, oh my God, I've already been speaking for that long. Gee whiz. When that experience happens where we find ourselves outside of our body, and obviously we can only talk about it when we come back to the body, right? And there are, of course, millions of such stories and experiences that have been told, that have been written down, that have been communicated in all kinds of ways and turned into fairy tales and into mythologies, etc. But that experience is, of course, helpful for us to grapple with that life force leaving the biology again. And biology ends, and then we just have chemistry. Because then it's just matter reacting with each other. At least I hope I'm understanding this correctly, that is still in our understanding of the two different sciences. The biology is the alive form of matter and existence, and chemistry is the non-alive but reactive form of matter. So what is that difference? All of those questions have always interested me and have always encouraged me to Diane Addison says, lovely, you are sharing your wisdom. Thank you, Diane. So glad to see you here. Yeah, what an exciting time to be here on my first podcast. All right, so what then is biology and what then is reproduction? Isn't reproduction what biology is and what life is, and therefore what we are, and why we should have an enormous amount of respect and embrace in a respectful, responsible manner that which is reproduction, not just our own reproduction, but all of reproduction on the planet. And of course, that then can lead into discussing what happened in the human consciousness or lack thereof that could lead to chemicals being invented to exactly end that reproduction. And all chemicals that are pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, antibiotics, etc., are always killing that reproduction. And again, it is my privilege that I had these translations that showed that these chemicals that, for example, the creation of a new antibiotic turned out to be too toxic for humans to take, or too toxic, too deadly, too there are all these expressions, the LD50 and the LD100, that's the death point of when 50% die or when 100% die, right? You have to have this much of the substance and then 50% die or 100% die. This is all very scientific. But if it's too toxic, therefore, a material, we might use it as an herbicide or as a pesticide or as a rodent killer or you name it, as a biological weapon. So all these inventions that are, they are killers. have the purpose of or function by interrupting the reproductive life cycle. So they will disrupt the hormonal cycle of a human or an insect or a plant, right? And therefore pesticide, pest being insects for the most part, rodent killers, etc. We have invented these items, not out of the blue, obviously, but because we already are in an era of 7,000 years of patriarchy and warring mentality. It is not contrary to the popular belief that it is human nature to be killing each other. I maintain it is not, because when you study the eras preceding the patriarchal era, which starts about 7,000 years ago in old China and other parts with empires, everywhere where there are empires, you get that development sooner or later that you want to be the only one, the only empire and the only emperor. And the masculinity of these emperors was, of course, also important. You know, females only could be the fillers when there was no son derived for the majority of these empires in the patriarchal era. And that is true for all the Asian and European empires, as well as for the Incas and the Aztecs, and many empirical structures come from that mindset. And it's just an era in human existence. I maintain that we've been on this planet much, much longer than is currently believed, because it's still all a theory. You know, Darwin's theory is also a theory. So many things are just theory. So we're coming into the age now of understanding that the killer modality, the war and killer modality, can end if we become conscious of the fact that that's what it is. Killing a disease, killing a germ is therefore also part of that mentality. On the other hand, balancing the body's microbiome, and you know, we have that word now, microbiome. It's a new word relatively, right? Namely that what I call the symphony of life, those trillions of entities that need to be tuned, that need to be collaborating in a composition that works, right? So when they get out of whack, because we hammer them with hormone disruptors so that they can't reproduce the beautiful sound that is a symphony, then our body gets out of balance. And I got off track here from what I was talking about. Oh, thank you, Diane. So we've got to work together still, Diane. I look forward to that opportunity. So yeah, the invention of warfare and the invention of chemicals has, for the most part, arisen out of the purpose of disrupting that reproduction and therefore disrupting life, right? A chemical used as warfare, of course, also ends another person's life. Various avenues, but often it is that disruption of reproduction. I guess you could call all poisoning a disruption of reproduction of healthy cell tissue, because when you can't breathe, for example, your lungs stop absorbing oxygen that you inhale and all those entities that you inhale. All right, enough of all of that. So I'm going to pick out different sectors, and I wanted to, for a minute, discuss or at least lay it out there what some of the topics will be on the podcast. And of course, I will have guests discussing with me particular topics. And that will go with more detail into, just to give you a little bit of a broad understanding, education and what it needs to become, education toward creativity, responsible creativity, parenting. Positive parenting, of course, has become a word, but how does that work? We want to talk about that. How do you actually respect a human being that comes into that body that we birth, right? That is already kind of connected, and it comes into life as it exits our mother's body. Another topic that has always fascinated me is adolescence. I want to talk about that transitioning from childhood into adolescence, becoming an individual. You know, we associate it a lot with rebellion, but what that really is the time in which we as humans in this lifetime figure out who we are as an individual, independent from mother and father and siblings and family and location and so forth. So it's and it often comes with all kinds of difficulties finding that place. So adolescence, and of course a very big topic is purpose. Can we live without purpose? And the purpose can be very minute and very tedious, and it can be very grand or ridiculous, right? There's this whole broad spectrum of purpose. Can we live without purpose? Do we have direction of any kind if we don't have purpose? You know, how do we define purpose? So that's always been very important. Also, with my working with my clients, that's been very important to establish an answer to my big question: why do you want to live? Why do you want to be healthy? So it's even bigger than why do you want to be healthy, is why do you want to live? If you cannot answer that question, I cannot help you get well. But of course, most people are shocked by that question, don't have an immediate answer. And then we realize that, oh, I do have all sorts of reasons. I do have, whether it's my children or my parents or my friends or the completion of a project, or whether it's I still need to travel around the world, there is always something that you can find that answers that question. Why do you want to live? And interestingly, even people like I had one young woman with me who had just survived her seventh suicide attempt. And she was kept in a hospital for 3 months. And still, she actually had an answer to that question, why do you want to live? She didn't say, well, I don't want to live. And she knew we will talk about more about that in that section of adolescence. She was young. So, and she became this wonderful mother and great human being. So I'm sure she will come back up as an example. But then I also will talk about what's going on the planet, and how does what we do in everyday life, how does what we eat, what we consume, impact the planet? Life in this body is almost like a replica of life on the planet. So life on the planet then means, why are things the way they are? Why do we eat, clothe ourselves, and function in the way we do on the planet? How does that impact the planet? And what are the forces driving the other? So inevitably, I'm going to talk about economy and the economy on the planet in this era of history. Now, somebody made a difference the other day between era and era. So you guys help me out here. I just know that in some parts of the world, the pronunciation is era, and in others, it's era. So yes, I will talk about the economy and this time in history where the economic power structures are shifting on the globe. And there's so many elements to that. There's so many things that point to that. 10 years ago, we still thought, oh, there's going to be a big economic collapse, right? But things always turn out differently, and all the rupture stories and the great crash never quite happens the way the doomsday singers will have it, right? And I find that fascinating. So I want to talk about what is happening with this big economic crash that is not happening, but instead we have a shifting of world powers, and we have a shifting from conflict to collaboration, which I find absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And while it doesn't quite happen on all levels yet, it is happening. And when we're in this mindset of, oh, it's conflict, it's empire, it's, wanting to rule the world, and we project that upon everybody. But as somebody who has actually lived in very different cultures, from Scotland to Norway to Zimbabwe to Romania to Mexico to France to Germany to the US to Canada to, and a bunch more. I have seen that the mindset is not the same everywhere. Humans in different parts of the world do not quite fall in the same manner for this conflict at all cost economy, which is driven, of course, by war and the military industrial complex, as some wise president, or at least he had a wise moment, had predicted. So we're actually, instead of collapsing that system, or that system collapsing itself, are experiencing a shift that will bring in very different social structures as well. And how those again connect with the new understanding of how our biology and our health functions. And of course, I will talk then about what is behind that which is matter, right? We already know theoretically that everything is energy, but what does that mean? How does that manifest itself in our understanding of the world? Everything is energy, well, yeah, okay. The energy of this table stops the energy of my hand from going through it. It seems really hard to understand, right? And I'm going to end on this note. I had to explain to somebody who was wanting to work with me. She wasn't quite ready. But I said, well, you already know that some energies go through this table. Which energies are those? I don't know, the saw or something, like a mechanic. She was thinking of something mechanical, like an axe or a saw. I said, no. Your cell phone goes right through that wall and out the other side. And the energy of your cell phone that you dialed a very particular number on connects without wires to somebody else's. So we already have those energies in our life, but we're not conscious that, of course, that which I am saying right now and I'm thinking right now also produces an energy. So, yeah, we'll go into those spaces as well, the science of biology beyond matter. I find all those elements really, really fascinating. Okay, my dear first podcast viewers, I'm sure over the week we will have some more visibility of this. If you are here before, or if you come across this before Sunday, the 24th of September, 2023, please also look into my mastermind series. The upcoming mastermind will be What We Must Share Now. Why? That's the title. Sharing. It's really all about sharing, and that the era of sharing is beginning. Yeah. That's it for today. Hi, Rhonda. Oh, it's so great to see you in here. Great reasoning, Rhonda says. So good. Love it. Yeah, I always, we need a new age of reason and logic and just thinking and observing what's really out there and how it all works. All right. This has been the first Real Humans, Great Souls, and I thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Please comment. Please share and make others aware so that we can grow this community of real humans with great souls. Ciao for today. Thank you.